Good morning, friends, families, foes. Happy December, happy Thanksgiving, happy however you choose to celebrate the end of November. We're thankful for you. We're thankful for you joining us. Today, I am back. Prem Tucker here with my colleague, the ace, as I've said, Swin. Mehdi is still absent, but he'll be back very soon. We are missing him just as much as you are. He'll be back very, very soon, I assure you. Today, we are talking about a lot of terrible things as usual, unfortunately. In the past few days, as you might have seen, things in the Caribbean have only escalated amid reporting that one of the first early strikes that happened in the array of strikes that the U.S. has done since, over 20 now in the Caribbean, that one of them was in fact a double tap that was complying with orders by Pete Hegseth himself, the Secretary of War, as he calls himself, to kill everybody. We will also be talking about Donald Trump's escalation on his crackdown on both the press and migrants coming to the U.S., often at the case of U.S.'s own actions. And of course, we will be talking about Benjamin Netanyahu asking for a pardon. Firstly, I must ask you, Swin, how are you doing? How was your Thanksgiving?
My brain is still rebooting as we speak. I'm not fully up and running yet. But as you pointed out earlier, yeah, Mehdi will be back soon. Ask the editors, audience will have to settle for me for now. I'm wearing a Van Halen concert t-shirt, not Mehdi's patented Zeteo hoodie. You have a Zeteo sweater on, and again, our listeners will have to settle for that for now.
That's right,
But
that's right.
anyway, we got a lot to discuss. So
We do. And just a reminder, before we get into it, as always, Substack YouTube viewers, wherever you're watching, please be sure to submit your questions. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. So please do. Even if it seems like it's something that we might have talked about earlier, just throw it in. We'll try to get to it if we can. But yes, Swin, let's start off
don't
by
ask anything
talking
about our hair.
Yes.
We're doing what we can. It's a little too early for that.
Work in progress, yeah. But Swin, let's start with Pete Hegseth and the Caribbean. As we saw, this was actually reported earlier that there was indeed a double tap strike by Nick Terse over at The Intercept, that there was a double tap strike on September 1st or 2nd, I believe, the first strike in this barrage that has now happened. But what we've learned in recent days is that this was to comply with a reported order by Pete Hegseth to, quote, kill them all. And I know this is something you talked about a bit in our first draft newsletter. Plug for you guys to please subscribe to our morning newsletter. But tell us a bit more about what you know about the contours of Hegseth's orders, what this means about maybe the other strikes that have happened as well, and sort of how Hegseth and Trump world is responding to reports that there is this order to kill them all.
I'm trying to wrap my head around some of the different contours, as you put it, because we have to do our own reporting on this. This is something that, as you point out, was reported initially in some form or another by Nick Terse over at The Intercept, and then two reporters, Alex and Ellen at the Washington Post, had this story in recent days, a rather bombshell investigation at the Washington Post that built on the earlier Intercept reporting. The newest nugget in that, which might be the most important facet here, is them citing two, I believe, sources with direct knowledge with the matter, that Hegseth gave the verbal, notice the lack of paper trail, but verbal order to do the double tap so that there are no survivors, to give no quarter, to, in a paraphrase, kill them all. Essentially, this would be a war crime if there were, in fact, a war going on. That's something we can talk about in a moment. But the added value that the Washington Post brought here, that then got the scoop to reverberate throughout the corridors of official Washington, get both Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill to call for investigations and for answers into this, is the reporting that Hegseth gave the order himself. There was a personal, you need to kill everybody, double tap, no quarter, order from the highest levels of Donald Trump's Washington. Now, in the way that Trump and Hegseth and others in the administration are reacting to this reporting from the Post, it started with extreme non-denials. Like, Hegseth put out a very huffy statement after the Post originally published this reporting. And if you read this long tweet, X-post, whatever the hell it was, there is no actual denial in there that he gave the order. In fact, there is a celebration of the administration's policies of obliterating dozens upon dozens of these so-called, quote-unquote, narco-terrorists in the Caribbean Sea. Now, I want to make three quick points. Number one, this isn't about drugs. This is a part of the administration's broader pressure campaign to try to do a regime change or a possible war on Venezuelan soil, which is a larger, more horrifying scandal in its own right. Number three, the administration keeps saying over and over again that these people are narco-terrorists, a term that to me has no particular meaning, except it's what Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, Stephen Miller, and Marco Rubio want anybody or any civilian at home or abroad to be. Like, even if these people are on these boats are some of the worst drug traffickers or whatever in the world. First of all, I'm not believing the administration when they say they know who are on these boats. That's just not something any reasonable person should do. And B, even if they were, they're drug smugglers. They're drug traffickers. They are not terrorists. This is an expansion of the global war on terror playbook that the Trump administration is currently stretching to an insane, abusive breaking point. And number three, we keep talking about how the double tap, if it is as it was reported in the Washington Post, and obviously senators and congresspeople on Capitol Hill are now demanding answers, we keep referring to it as being tantamount to a war crime, which is a very Orwellian, dystopian way to be talking about this when there isn't actually a war going on. It's not a war crime. This is a murder spree that Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, Pete Hegseth, and Marco Rubio are currently orchestrating in the Caribbean Sea. It is a goddamn murder incorporated.
Perfect way to put it. Perfect way to put it. And what strikes me is that I'm 27 years old, and every horrific U.S. foreign policy decision that's ever come over the course of decades has been repeated on hyperdrive during the time that me and everyone else in Gen Z has come into our politics. Every time a U.S. administration wants to look tough on immigration or drugs as, I guess, a means of making us look away from everything else that they might be failing us on, suddenly Latin America becomes this staging ground for some new pursuit, some new crusade. Every time they treat Latin America like this imperial board game. They then whip up outrage that the people that they disrupt in this board game then run towards the US border. And I think just something that struck me throughout all of this, both in the recent weeks but in recent months, is that whether you're a Candace Owens or Nick Fuentes listener or a Pod Save America or Dropsite or Zeteo listener or anything in between, is that this all should be very clear to you, that none of this is about, as you say, stopping immigration or illegal immigration, as they put it, or the influx of drugs to America. Because if it were, DC wouldn't have spent decades destabilizing every inconvenient government south of the Rio Grande and then throwing up their hands and trying to get mad at the consequences of their own actions. Let's go down the list. There's overthrowing Arbenz in Guatemala in the 50s, the U.S. support for the coup against Allende in Chile, ushering in Pinochet, the Contra War against the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, backing paramilitary groups in Colombia. Again and again, U.S. actions over and over and over again, over the course of decades again, resulted in what saving Latin America and saving, the Western Hemisphere really just meant propping up regimes that were, cynically friendly to U.S. business or strategic interests, with no obvious interest in human rights, let alone this idea of stopping the influx or transportation of illegal drugs or solving immigration. And you saw this maybe last week, Swin, I think we were messaging about this crazy clip of a Republican representative on Fox Business chopping it up with the anchor saying, you're on Fox Business. We realize that going into Venezuela is going to be great for Exxon and all these companies. It's like, to be a 27-year-old and to be a member of Gen Z and coming into like your political consciousness right now is just to be just surrounded by, divulged with just every terrible instinct of U.S. foreign policy in just months, from Gaza to this like lurch towards potentially flirting with invading Venezuela and all these strikes on these boats with no sense of proof, as if there's justification at all, even if they were carrying drugs. It's just crazy making. And I think, and that's why you see in these polls, most of Americans think this is insane. They think it's crazy. And I don't know. I just, Swin, I just wonder if you, as someone who's a little bit older than me and has seen more of these terrible impulses of U.S. foreign policy over the course of longer years, how you feel in reflecting on it. Does that make sense?
I am an elder millennial, or at least getting up into those parts. So yes, I am showing my age in multiple ways right now. And I guess I'll just put it this way. Over the past 2.5 decades, I kind of psyched myself into thinking that America as a declining empire could be a declining empire without aggressively doing empire in decline type things. That was an incredibly naive thing for me to think over the past quarter of a century. And from everything from electing the reality TV kingpin mobster wannabe to be leader of the nominally free world twice, to everything you were talking about and everything that we are doing to ourselves at home and abroad, almost just for fun. Sometimes it feels like it. That is how I feel about it. I years and years ago diagnosed that we are an empire in decline. This was hyper accelerated by the post 9/11 and global war on terror era. And what you are seeing is a very embarrassing live streamed version of an empire in decline. Thank goodness Rome at the end of its days did not have TikTok. It may be a little bit less humiliating than what we're living through right now.
Yeah.
But moving on, speaking of empire in decline hours and really embarrassing things about the so-called leader of the free world doing his thing on live TV all the time, we are seeing a uptick, what I would call a boomlet, in Donald Trump yelling at people, lashing out in reporters at ways that we oftentimes do not see. Obviously, whether he's shitposting on the internet or he's being himself at a live event or whatever, Donald Trump is very accustomed to like scolding the media and being very catty about it. That's just who he is. That's who he was in his celebrity reality TV and real estate days. That's who he is as the sitting president of the United States. But there is a way that he has been doing it in recent days where you can tell that, okay, things are getting to you and eating at you a little bit harder than they usually do.
Yeah. It struck me because I feel like in Trump 1, we were very used to a through line of, on the daily, Trump would be attacking the press. It was very common that, of course, calling the press the enemy of the people, being at rallies, sort of sicking rally attendees to look back at the press and kind of metaphorically throw tomatoes at them and so forth, and, constantly calling them fake news, whatever. What felt a little different this term is that, of course, they're still very hostile and antagonistic towards the press. But still, there was this sense of like some form of at least stability in terms of press relations within the White House with regards to it. At the very least, there was not as much friction with regards to like press secretaries going in and out like Scaramucci. There was no sort of Scaramucci time unit of rotating cast of press secretaries. What feels so different is that, so there was the first 9 or 10 months of that like at least superficial sense of stability. That obviously has changed, as you put it, in recent weeks, where over and over again, he's either deliberately lashing out, usually at female reporters, which is perhaps unsurprising, but perhaps poor timing, given that he's trying to convince himself that he actually treats women respectfully and has nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein.
And the lack of keeping it even mildly togetherness and the word choices and pejoratives he chooses. What he's been doing in recent weeks, whether calling someone a little piggy or whatever specific words he used there when I think they were asking about Epstein, or recently when someone asked him about the ethnic cleansing related comments that he's been doing recently. He didn't actually say ethnic cleansing. I mean, a little bit cute with my paraphrase there. He was sitting down at Mar-a-Lago and started saying, "You're a stupid person. You're really stupid. Why would you?" He usually doesn't do stuff like that. And we can get into a moment why we think he's doing that in a moment. But to your point, there is something about the peak that is increasing. And it's clear, like, the job is getting to him in a way right now that it was not back in March.
Yeah, and what do you think is the reason why? Like, what do you think was the inflection point, or at least incitement point that made him seem a bit more hostile lately?
Oh, the Epstein stuff, especially it re-exploding into the national consciousness and national media over the past couple of weeks or so. Like, if you talk to his closest advisors, they will all tell you that there is nothing that we talk to him about right now that pisses him off, gets under his skin, and just infuriates the already mercurial president any more than talking about the ongoing Epstein scandal, to the point that some of them actively try to avoid bringing up the words Jeffrey Epstein when they're in his presence, because they don't know how necessarily volcanic the reaction is going to be. And that's sort of where you saw him starting to get, I don't know if antsier is the right word, when he's been dealing with the press and the public recently. But also, he is extraordinarily sensitive about coverage about his brain and about his health and his conditions as a very elderly man right now. There was a story in the New York Times that published a few days ago where it kind of pretty gently, all things considered, put the spotlight on him as like getting sleepier, to very purposefully use that term right now, and showing his age and perhaps a declining level of stamina and other things. And that absolutely infuriated him, made him apoplectic. And it's just another one of those things that if you really want to get under Donald Trump's skin, you bring up Jeffrey Epstein and you bring up the fact that he may be in decline right now as a very elderly man.
Which we saw, was it yesterday or the day before, of him on Air Force One being asked about an MRI and him saying that it went really well. He doesn't know, what was scanned, or he didn't say what was scanned, but it went really well. Did you have any more insight on that or thoughts on that? I saw there was a great AP headline I'm paraphrasing. It's like, Donald Trump got an MRI, but he's not sure where it was.
All I'll say about that right now is that it's sometimes exceedingly difficult to tell the difference between when did Donald Trump exactly start to cognitively decline, and the fact that I don't think there was any point in his adult life where he actively, perfectly, cognitively inclined. So it's a little bit difficult to see where like the sweet spot, the nexus between those two things is.
Sure.
Well,
I was going to say, I know we're at 11:20, so maybe I know there's one other topic we need to get to, and I think that might come up in Q&A. So maybe let's get to some viewer questions just related to things we've talked about, because I want to make sure we get to. There's a lot of good ones here. With regards to the Hegseth strikes, the Caribbean strikes, there's a few good questions. One first from Michael on Substack, who asks, will we see them skate once again, or is this action a bridge too far and thus a fracture that will widen and hasten the collapse of this horrendous administration? What do you think, Swin?
It's extraordinarily difficult to tell right now, just because, as our reader pointed out, they keep skating on massive scandal after massive scandal, not just like cable news catnip style scandals, but highly abusive, highly degrading scandals that, when they're not about plain old-fashioned democratic backsliding and authoritarian power grabs, they are about things that are literally affecting like the pocketbooks or the well-being of millions upon millions of people at home and abroad. These are not just like fancy ivory tower dorm room debates about American democracy or the future of the republic or whatever. These are kitchen table issues and really horrifying things going on in our communities. And yet these people have been skating and getting away with it because they control the Department of Justice. They control the White House. Having said that, you can only do so much of that before the American populace and the electorate start telling you in one form or another to please kindly go fuck yourself. And the fact that Donald Trump cannot seem to, at this point, pull himself from zigging in and out of the high 30s, 37, 38, 39 percentage points of approval rating, which any administration will tell you is the danger zone for any incumbent, even though hopefully Donald Trump is not running again. Presumably people like J.D. Vance and other people in the Republican Party want a near-term political future to be successful. You never know until you're looking at it in the rearview mirror of recent history what is going to be the catalyst that starts collapsing all the big dominoes. And when you have a president, a woefully unpopular, madman incumbent who keeps hovering in the high 30s in presidential approval rating, and suddenly top lawmakers on Capitol Hill, both some Republicans and Democrats, are saying, we need answers. We think you're running a murder campaign in the Caribbean Sea, and we would like you to maybe stop, please, or at least give us some answers. It does seem to be like we're starting to write the story as a national people of the beginning of the end of this stranglehold on executive power and cult of personality that Trump seems to be wielding right now. The problem is you kind of psych yourself out because you think to yourself, we have been here before and he's going to get away with it again. But presumably at some point, he's not going to get away with it. I just don't know if this is it.
Yeah. Selwyn Cambridge on YouTube first says hello, and we both say hello back. Thank you. But asks, I think, a very basic but I think fundamental question, which is, what about the people in the boats? They could be a desperate Venezuelan guy who needs the money and was just asked to help on a boat. And I want to address this first before I get you in, Swin, here, which is, this question is exactly right. That, again, even if these boats are carrying drugs, and even if some of them, if not all of the passengers signed up for this, these strikes are illegal, both in the military law sense, but also in just a moral law sense, in terms of basic moral principles that most human beings can intuit or understand. That this literally, both in a humanistic sense, does not hold to be of principle, and of legal sense makes no sense. There is no justification for releasing these shadowy videos of boats in the night on your radar and just striking them out of the water. Which, and again, there has been reporting to suggest that some of these people were indeed had nothing to do with this supposed international drug trade that justifies pretty much diet war strikes. I mean, one thing that always gets me is the sense that, like, we're lurching towards war, or like we're heating up towards war. This is, in all sense, unauthorized strikes, usage of U.S. military resources to kill people. That is the line that we should be using to determine whether we are or are not doing something, not a formal declaration of war by an administration going on the backs of many other administrations that have done so much violence without formally declaring war on something. And of course, this is all part of an already declared, failing over the course of decades, stupid war on drugs. And I just want to, one final point. You know, you talk about how this is really putting the Trump administration in the tank. This is the Trump-Vance administration. This is the Trump, Vance, Rubio, Hegseth, Stephen Miller administration. Mm-hmm. All of those names and more have their names on this. If and when Trump is gone, that means nothing about whether you as an American citizen should view J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio or Pete Hegseth or any other Republican or any other Democrat differently if they stood by and either defended this, signed up for it, or said nothing about it. Your view as a person in this country should not change one iota just because Donald Trump's name isn't on something as shameless and immoral and insulting to your morality as something like this.
Yeah, it's. I think you put that rather beautifully, if not horrifyingly, there. And it's something that we try to do at our reporting at Zeteo all the time. That this, as much as this is a Donald Trump personality cult, as much as this is Donald Trump's doing, at the end of the day, the Republican Party could stop this anytime they wanted to. They're not doing it, either because they're tolerating it, or, which is the truth of the matter in most of the cases, is they love it. They've thrown their arms around it and bear hugged it. They fully embraced it. So at the end of the day, what you're seeing here is not a Trumpist project, even though it is. It's a Republican Party project. It's the Republican Party and conservative movement mainstream. And to go at the question that was asked earlier, look, if you look at the way the administration has been caught lying multiple times and not caring that they've been caught red-handed lying, when they spread falsehoods and outright lie about people, including women who they have shot or abused or otherwise hurt during this ongoing blitz by Donald Trump's masked secret police to form a militarized deportation force in the United States. If you look at how much they lie about that, doing it to American citizens or people in the United States, in our streets, US civilians, what do you think they are going to not hesitate for 1 millisecond to do if they're talking about civilians who they are blowing up off the coast of Venezuela or in the Caribbean Sea? There is no reason at all. Look, is it possible that some of the people they've blown up in this ongoing murder campaign are really bad folks? Sure. But at the end of the day, A, you still shouldn't get to murder them willy-nilly. That doesn't really change the principle we're talking about. And B, almost just as fundamentally importantly, I will not believe a single thing Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, JD Vance, or any of them say about the identities of the people on these boats, unless there is heavy, really good independent corroboration. It is not a conspiracy theory for you at home, Zeteo listeners and viewers, to not believe a single word that comes out of any of these people's mouths if they say they blew up a bad guy. There is just as much reason, if not more reason, to believe they blew up a father and son fisherman duo who were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Again, not a conspiracy theory, not hyperbolic. Look at these guys' track records. There is no reason to believe that when they are breathing, they are not lying. That is what they do.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Moving on, or I shouldn't say moving on, but I want to make sure we do talk about a few other war criminals that we have to deal with for legal purposes. Selwyn Cambridge as well as P. Ray on Substack reminds us that there is also Benjamin Netanyahu and his request for a pardon. And so what's going on? As many of you know, Netanyahu has been facing corruption charges for a very long time now. He is formally requesting Israeli President Isaac Herzog to pardon him on an ongoing corruption trial, I might add, it's still ongoing, to pardon him under the argument that this is dividing the nation at a time where they need to be united, in wake of renewed peace that they're pursuing in the Middle East. Of course, a nation that, after achieving the supposed peace deal with Donald Trump with regards to its genocide in Gaza, has continued killing people in Gaza and is continuing its rampant assault in the West Bank, as well as its continued violence in places like Syria as well. Nevertheless, he's arguing that this will distract from that supposed peacemaking and nation unifying that he is currently leading. Something that strikes me about this is that, of course, another aspect to this is the American politics side of this, which is weeks and weeks ago, Donald Trump also requested Herzog to pardon Netanyahu. Trump directly appealed to him to make that happen, which, of course, means a lot when it's coming from the direct sort of funder of most of your sort of government functioning in some respects. There's also the fact that I go back to even further when U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee, who really refused to do much with regards to responding to the killing of Palestinian Americans like Saif al-Musallat or the ongoing detention that has just been sort of relieved, the detention of 16-year-old Mohammed Ibrahim, a Palestinian American who had been in detention for nearly 10 months. Mike Huckabee did really nothing about that either. What he did do during that same time was go to one of Netanyahu's hearings to show support to Netanyahu. during his charges, during his legal proceedings in his own country, facing his own charges in his own country for corruption. A U.S. ambassador did not do anything to help an American who was in the detention of that Israeli leader, but he did go to support that Israeli leader. Again, this is the America First administration. They have repeatedly, over and over, not only, of course, unconditionally funded Benjamin Netanyahu and his war criminal activities, obviously over the course of more than just 2 years, by the way. They have repeatedly intervened on behalf of him in a foreign country's legal process to shield him from any domestic accountability, while he, his soldiers, his settlers, the people that he oversees, the people that he is in charge of, have repeatedly brutalized, terrorized, uprooted, and killed not only thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of Palestinians, but also scores of Americans. And I think that underscores the broader issue with actually the question of accountability for Benjamin Netanyahu, which is that with the shield of the American state, it is questionable what it will look like for him to receive domestic accountability because, of course, as we had seen even before October 7th, there were lots and lots of huge protests against Netanyahu, not necessarily for his treatment of Palestinians. Sometimes there were protest attendees who were concerned with the plight of Palestinians, but if nothing else, him as a leader and his corruption. The issue beyond that is even if he does face some level of accountability, there are so many other incredibly corrupt or viciously right-wing Israeli politicians and parties waiting in the wing to fill the gap in the vacuum. And so I think that leads to this broader question of like U.S. support for Israeli society with the larger question of like what does it mean to achieve peace in the Middle East or peace between Israel and Palestine. It seems like with previous apartheid governments in the past that until the U.S. stops treating them like such a direct client state, the question of peace, I know this is getting much larger than just a question of Netanyahu, but it's all interrelated. The question of peace is difficult because the more that the Israeli society and the upper echelons of Israeli society specifically, as in the government, believes they can continue to behave this way with unconditional U.S. support, that Netanyahu can do whatever he wants, whether it's the vicious war crimes or the domestic corruption, and still rely on U.S. support, that even if Netanyahu goes, the successor to Netanyahu will behave the same way, that they will believe that they can behave both domestically corrupt in a way that the U.S. has certainly intervened in other countries before, or at least pretended that those governments were corrupt to justify invading them, wink wink, that might be going on right now in other countries, and they can commit war crimes on the U.S. taxpayer dime, and they will face no accountability, which means there will be no real sense of peace between Israel and Palestine. There will be no sense of humanity and the sort of fruition of human rights for Palestinians as long as this can continue. So the question of Netanyahu's domestic fate actually has much larger implications because that relates to how we in the U.S. view this. That relates to how we in the U.S. view U.S. leaders over and over again intervening to protect Netanyahu while doing nothing to protect Americans. So that is my current thought on what is happening in Israel and how there's much larger import than just Netanyahu himself, which is always the case when it comes to how we should view U.S. relations towards Israel, if that makes sense.
Right. And Donald Trump and his ilk always like to say they're not globalists, they're not internationalists, they are nationalists. I mean, that only goes so far and is only true to the extent that they are internationalists. It's just that it's for their buddies. It's for their fellow autocratic, bloodlusting, abusive, anti-democratic crew, whether Israel, Brazil, or any of these other nations of the country where Donald Trump has a friend in power who needs a helping hand. To that degree, there is no limit to his internationalism. It's international solidarity and locking arms all the way, as long as you are as vulgar and horrible and cynical as the current so-called leader of the free world. Before we get going, I want to get to a couple of these comments, at least one more question.
Yes.
Foster Andrew Bell says, haha, this is like David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest electing a lounge singer as president. Yes, if the lounge singer were significantly more homicidal and deranged than he was. But it's been a long time since I've read the book, so perhaps the character was that. Foster Andrew Bell also says, well, it's clear from the defections and his approval ratings that MAGA's cracking in innumerable fissures. All I will keep saying is, we'll see. We shall see. But there are cracks. I'm just not sure if I'd go as far as to say they're irreparable and also innumerable. Roland Kruger says, every detail of the Trump debacle is being reported in infinite detail by every possible media source. What is not being reported is the inept, incompetent Democratic Party leadership, Schumer and Jeffries. The talking heads, the pundits and commentators who have been wrong for decades and are still on the air collecting paychecks and have never actually been held accountable for being consistently wrong. Prem, I'll hand it to you for a response in a moment, but all I gotta say, Roland, is this is the United States of America. You have just described our modern political and media ecosystem to a T. In fact, I think what you just described is more of a business model than it is a flaw in the system. Not here at Zeteo, though. Support independent media. Subscribe now. Yada, yada, yada.
That's exactly right. I think, obviously, this complaint, first of all, very valid and correct complaint, Roland. I totally agree with you. Something that's become much more clarified for me over the past 2 years is how it is very understandable for us to be so frustrated with the idea of seeing a very, as you say, inept, incompetent Democratic Party leadership or just shameless class of talking heads, pundits, commentators, news anchors who have consistently been wrong about these issues of foreign policy over and over and over again, or in fact complicit in whipping up the outrage and appetite for it and getting a fat paycheck for it. Implicit in that is this idea that we pay that paycheck in a way, or that they get off scot-free while lying to us, and that we're complicit in that. And in some respects we are, but I think a more helpful maybe way to think about this is the idea that much of those paychecks are not paid for by us. They're paid for by oil companies, weapons contractors companies, lobbyist groups, whether explicitly or implicitly. A lot of that cash just flows in the same circles of the elite class in this country, such that even though it sucks that people get paid so much money to be so wrong, so immoral, there is this sort of revelatory sense that that's maybe just not for us. That maybe they can all be these lobbyists, these think tank groups, these billionaires, maybe their money can just be a waste of money, because sure, they might be paying their friends to get richer, but they're not getting anything out of us. Because the whole point of that apparatus is to get our consent for them to then do immoral things, or at least our tolerance so that we don't get mad at them. If we, the royal we, as in the American people and the people of the world, do not listen to them, do not watch their dumb YouTube videos, do not watch their terrible news segments and read their disgusting, annoying, stupid columns, and it's just noise, it's a waste of their money. It's a waste of their money. Sure, 100 terrible people, or at least people who are making terrible decisions, they might not be terrible people in their souls, but they're making terrible darn decisions. Sure, they might get richer. But if we're not paying attention, and if we're not paying them money, the other terrible people funding them are just wasting their money. And they can continue paying each other for the same terrible columns that get written every few years when there's another country the US wants to invade, or there's another war that we want to waste our money on. But at least we don't support it. At least they don't get our public consent. And in fact, the more that happens, and the more we do support independent media, and the less we support or even allow our attention to be geared towards this dependent on billionaire media, the less likely that stuff can happen. Because the more the public's voice and the public's skepticism and the public's maybe interest in compassion and building a government that serves us rather than ignores us can be not only felt more and understood more, but subsequently more likely to happen. And so that's kind of how I've been trying to not just cope with that frustration, but really understand that there is another way for us to go out of this other than just yelling at the clouds, hoping that the Democratic Party leadership behaves differently or that the corporate media behaves anything other than how a corporate media ecosystem would behave. So that's how I feel about that. But I totally understand the frustration. I know a lot of us feel it, but we have to channel it towards something else. And I think that's where we can channel it to.
I suppose this is a terrible time to tell you that while Mehdi was gone, we actually successfully sold the Ask the Editor show to the Ellison family. So you are actually currently working for Barry Weiss right now as we speak.
Right. I mean, money talks. But that's why, instead of letting the Ellison family buy us, you can save us by subscribing now to Zeteo at zeteo.com/subscribe. There's a few other things I just want to get to, a few very nice comments just before we close out. NQ on Substack, hi from Kashmir, hello to you. Michael, hi, hello to all from Corvallis, Oregon. Love that. Range, by the way, from Kashmir to Oregon.
We love our Oregon and Kashmir viewers.
I also want to mention Tajdeed Khan on YouTube, who, when we were talking about kind of the horrors of growing up now in America and witnessing the follies over and over again of American foreign policy decision-making, Tajdeed says, raised on, quote, end of history optimism, slammed by 9/11, endless wars, 2008, debt and climate dread, watching everything get shitified while still trying to build a decent life in a rigged feeling system. Fellow elder millennial. I will say, Tajdeed, we did not start the fire. Tajdeed also gave $20. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Thanks to all of you for supporting us. Swin, is there anything else that you want to talk about or mention before we close out here?
I want to go off that last viewer comment really quickly, just to say that as dire and as depressed as I do sometimes sound when I'm garrulously ranting and screaming about all this to you guys, thank you for paying to watch that. There are my quieter moments where I do have a degree of hope that is kind of reflected in what she posted there, in the sense that once the empire implodes on itself, Italy still exists, and it's still, I hear from other people, a very lovely country to visit. The UK is still there. Unfortunately, Northern Ireland is still a part of it. But we'll get to that on another call. There is life and hope and good that can come after the empire collapsing. So I maybe that's something that we should end on every single one of these streams that you and I do together. Don't siphon yourself away from the world and your community just because the people of the commanding heights in power are doing everything they can to try to break you. Does that make sense?
That absolutely. Let's usher it in. Let's usher it in. You, me, and everyone listening here. Let's make it happen. Thank you so much, Swin, for that. That was a very lovely note to end it on. Thank you, everyone, for your very good questions and your very good thoughts. We appreciate it. We're sorry we couldn't get to it all, but reading them all, I love the thoughts. I agree with many of you, so thank you all for sending in your thoughts, your questions. Once again, Mehdi will be here shortly. I know you're missing him. We're all missing him. I also want to thank Swin, as always, for filling in. You make this so interesting. I love your mind. I love your brain, and I love to be working with you.
Likewise.
Everyone, thank you for your support, as always. Thank you for being alongside of us. I know we're just after Thanksgiving here. We're into the rest of the holiday season as well. We really appreciate all your support as we continue to try to report on the horrors of this world, but also what could come after it. So thank you again. Again, if you want to support us, a great holiday gift this holiday season is our Zeteo merch. You can find that on our website as well, alongside our incredible reporting from people like Swin. Take care, everyone. See you next week. Be well. Thank you.